Welcome to male revenge for every man the world wrote off and lived to regret it. Take a breath. Set the day down. Let these words settle over you. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Tonight, a 79-year-old Navy man. A lighthouse he built with his hands, and a son who thought the old man was finished. They were about to learn what 30 years at sea teaches a man. Sit back. Let's begin. They thought I was a senile old man. They were about to learn what 30 years in the United States Navy teaches a man. My son stood in front of 70 people and told them I had lost my mind. He said it gently, that was the cruelty of it. He told a room full of strangers that his father could no longer be trusted to feed himself, lock his own door, or tell the living from the dead. He said I spent my mornings talking to a photograph of my dead wife as if she could answer me. He was right about the talking. He was wrong about the answering, because 3 days before he stood up in that room, I had found what Eleanor left me. A letter, sealed inside the wall of the lighthouse we built with our own hands, hidden behind a loose brick on the 91st step. She put it there before the cancer finished its work, knowing I would not find it until the day I had to. My wife had been dead 5 years, and she still had one thing left to say to me. This is the story of the worst year of my life, and the only one that ever proved what I was made of. My name is Henry Calloway, and I will tell you all of it, including the parts where I played the fool. I am 79 years old. I gave 30 years to the United States Navy and retired a commander. The Navy taught me one lesson above all the rest. The distance between a man who lives and a man who dies is almost always small. A decision made in half a second. A rope that holds or lets go. A door you open or one you leave shut. It made me very hard to fool. It did not make me hard to fool by my own son, that I had to learn the expensive way. Eleanor used to say I brought the sea home with me. She meant the quiet I could watch the water for an hour without a word, and she would sit beside me, and that silence said more than words ever did. She has been gone 5 years. Lung cancer. 14 months from the first scan to the last morning. I gave her the pills myself, 6, 2:30, 11, and at the end I turned her bed to face the window, because she wanted to see the ocean when she went. After she was gone, I kept her rituals, 2 cups of coffee every morning. Not because I forgot she was dead, because I refused to forget she had been alive. I built this lighthouse with my hands, Point Keeper, on the southern tip of Cape May, New Jersey. We bought it in 1999, a ruin of broken glass and a leaning tower, and gave it 25 years. I did the bones of it. She did the soul. The red roses along the east wall she ordered from England. The reading room she shelved with her own hands, because she did not trust me to get the height right. Every morning I climb 97 steps to check the light. My knees file their complaints. My back testifies against me. I climb anyway. Eleanor asked me to keep the light burning, so it burns. At the bottom of those stairs hangs one photograph. My grandson, Lucas, 7 years old, on the harbor dock, my hands over his small hands, teaching him to tie a bowline. Every knot has to hold. I told him, your life might depend on it someday. Remember that boy. He was the only one of them who did. My son Mitchell is 45. He develops real estate in Philadelphia. He married a woman named Sharon, whose father is also in the business. And somewhere in the last 15 years, I stopped being his father and became a number on a page. He called every Sunday for 3 minutes. We talked about the Eagles, Sharon never came to the phone. I used to think she was shy. I know better now. His mother and I divorced when he was 11, and he spent his childhood carried between two houses. I spent my retirement savings to send him to Rutgers. I drove 3 hours each way to sit in cold bleachers and watch him. I thought that was closeness. I have had time since to wonder whether I confused showing up with being let in. I will tell you my first real mistake now, because it matters later. 3 months after we buried Eleanor, Mitchell sat at my kitchen table with a folder, a pen, and a soft voice, slid papers in front of me, and I signed them without reading one line. I was hollowed out. I could not see the use in reading carefully when the woman I read everything for was gone. I trusted my son. Trust handed to the wrong man at the wrong moment is just a door left standing open. I did not know what I had signed. I would find out, so would they. Then came the Tuesday. Mitchell did not call on Tuesdays. In 5 years, he never once broke the Sunday rhythm. So when the phone rang while I stood in the lantern room with a rag in my hand, and his name lit the screen on the wrong day, something moved in my chest that was not quite hope and not quite dread, but lived in the narrow water between them. I answered. He said, "How are you really doing?" "Dad," 5 words. He had never put those 5 words in that order in 45 years. And here's the part I am not proud of. Underneath his voice, a whisper of paper sliding across a tabletop. Then a breath not his. A woman's breath, held and careful. Someone was standing close beside him, listening. The Navy trained me to hear exactly that kind of silence. I heard it, and I ignored it, because I wanted the call to be real more than I wanted to be right. I looked out at the Atlantic and told my son I was fine. I had no idea what those 2 words were about to cost me. They came on a Saturday, 3 weeks after the Tuesday. I heard the car in the gravel before I saw it, a silver Mercedes I did not recognize until Mitchell stepped out of the driver's side. He looked well cut, hair close, the kind of man who looks expensive without appearing to try, which only means he tries very hard. Sharon came around from the passenger side in a cream coat and low heels that were wrong for a gravel drive. She walked carefully, choosing each step, the way a person moves through a place they have already decided not to respect. I had come down from the tower when I heard the engine. I was on the front steps when they came through Eleanor's garden gate, and for one moment I let myself feel the simplest thing in the world. My son had come home. Whatever the reason, he had come. Mitchell hugged me. 3 seconds, firm and brief. The hug men give when they do not know what else to do with their arms. Sharon hugged me too, shorter, and said, "We've missed you so much, Henry." In the voice of a woman reading lines she had rehearsed but not learned. I made coffee. We sat in the kitchen where the morning light came through Eleanor's window, and I remembered the breath I had heard on the phone 3 weeks before. The careful, held breath of someone who did not want to be heard, and I watched the 2 of them the way the Navy taught me to watch a thing I do not yet understand. Observe, record. Do not react until you know what you are looking at. Mitchell asked about my health first. Blood pressure, cholesterol. Was I sleeping? Was I keeping up with my doctor? My medications? My appointments? Reasonable questions for a son to ask a father of 79. He asked them in order, the way a man reads down a list. He was checking boxes, not hearing me. Then something happened that I was not ready for. Sharon went to the study to make a call, and for a few minutes it was only the 2 of us. Mitchell picked up the wedding photograph from the mantel, Eleanor in the dress her mother had sewn. The two of us young enough that I sometimes do not know my own face in it. He looked at it a long time, and when he spoke, his voice was not the voice of the man reading down the list. It cracked. "I miss her too. Dad," he said. "I should have come back sooner. After. I know that, and God help me." I believed him. For the length of that one sentence, I forgot the breath on the phone and the rehearsed coat and the careful steps. And I saw my boy on the harbor dock with the rope in his small hands, and I wanted, more than I have wanted most things, for it to be real. Then Sharon's voice came from the study. "Mitchell." Just his name. Nothing else. And I watched my son's face close like a door. The wet went out of his eyes. He set the photograph down, not facing the room, the way Eleanor liked it, but turned a few degrees toward the wall, and he said, "Anyway, we should talk about the practical things while we're here. I have thought about that moment more than any other from that day. Not the betrayal, the obedience, the way a single word in her voice could reach inside my son and turn him off like a lamp." Sharon came back after a long while, long enough that I noticed a scuff on the toe of her right heel that had not been there in the drive the mark a shoe takes when its owner has been moving quietly through rooms, opening doors, leaning in to look. She sat, lifted her coffee, and smiled at me. I said nothing. I had spent my whole life believing the polite thing and the right thing were the same. That belief was about to cost me. After lunch, Mitchell helped me move boxes from the storage room to the hall. He offered without being asked, which was kind. And while we worked, he said lightly, "The way you say a thing that is not light at all. Dad, have you ever thought about what happens to this place down the road? It's a lot of property for one man." I said I thought about Eleanor's roses and the light on the water in the morning, and that was about as far as I got. He laughed and let it go, but it was said. And a thing once said hangs in a room the way smoke hangs after the fire is out. When they gathered their coats, I noticed Mitchell had come without Lucas. I had not seen my grandson in 2 years. I almost asked. I did not. Another door I left shut. The silver Mercedes backed down the drive at 4 o'clock and turned north toward the highway. I went inside, poured Eleanor's untouched cup into the sink, washed it, and set it on the rack. Then I walked the house, slow, room by room, the way I had started to. The wedding photograph on the mantel was lying face down, not turned a few degrees now. Flat, glass against the wood. Eleanor's face pressed to nothing. I stood there a long moment. Then I picked her up and set her right, and that was when I saw it. A single sheet of paper slipped behind the filing cabinet, white against the dark wood, dropped by a hand that had been somewhere it had no business being. I drew it out. Coastal Apex Development, across the top, in clean corporate blue. Below that, Point Keeper Lighthouse preliminary valuation. And below that, a number with too many zeros, beside a column of comparable coastal parcels. And in the bottom corner, a date. The appraisal had been ordered 11 days before my son ever picked up the phone to ask how I was really doing. They had not driven down to see their father. They had come to take inventory of a man who was still breathing. That night, I checked every lock in the lighthouse. I had not done that in years. 30 years at sea teaches a man to sleep behind a secured door. But Eleanor and I had grown careless out here on the point, where the only thing that ever came up the drive was the mail. Now I went room to room with the appraisal still in my shirt pocket, testing every window, every bolt, the way I once walked a ship at midnight. Front door, garden door, basement. The basement door was unlocked. I always lock the basement. Eleanor used to laugh at me for it, a man who bolts his own cellar against his own house. But I lock it, and it stood open, the bolt drawn back. And I stood at the top of those dark stairs with my hand on the frame and felt the cold come up out of the ground. The appraisal had not slipped from a careless hand. Someone had wanted me to find nothing. They had simply missed one sheet. I locked the basement. I did not sleep much. 3 days later, on a Wednesday morning, a man knocked on my door and said his name was Feldman. He was somewhere in his 50s, pleasant, soft-handed, carrying the kind of leather bag a doctor carries in a film about doctors. He said he was a friend of Mitchell and Sharon's. He said he ran a program that gave free health screenings to retired servicemen in the county. That he had heard there was a Navy man down at the Lighthouse. And did I have a few minutes? I should have shut the door. By then I knew enough to shut the door. But he had said the word veteran. And that word is a hand on the shoulder to men like me. And it is a hard thing to refuse a hand on the shoulder when you have spent your whole life inside the thing it stands for. So I let him in. That was a mistake. I have a habit of making the courteous mistake. He sat at Eleanor's table and opened his bag and took out a clipboard. And I noticed the first wrong thing right away. A man who comes to screen your health takes your blood pressure. He checks your pulse. He looks in your eyes. Feldman did none of it. The bag stayed mostly closed. The clipboard did all the work. He asked his questions in a gentle, unhurried voice. Did I ever forget where I was? Did I ever lose track of the day? Did I eat regular meals? I gave him plain answers, and he wrote longer than my answers warranted, the way a man writes when the words are already decided and the visit is only theater for the file. Then he asked the question that told me everything. And do you ever find yourself talking to your late wife? He said. To her picture. Perhaps. I had not mentioned Eleanor. I had not mentioned a picture. I had said nothing in that whole visit about how I spend my mornings, or that there is a photograph on the windowsill I tell good morning before I climb the stairs. There was only one way a stranger at my kitchen table knew to ask that exact question. Someone had told him what to write before he ever knocked. I kept my face still. The Navy is good for that. I said yes. I talked to her sometimes, and he wrote it down with a small, satisfied motion, and he did not know that he had just handed me the shape of the whole thing. A doctor who was not a doctor. A report built to specification. A conclusion that had been decided in a room in Philadelphia weeks ago, and that this pleasant, soft-handed man had driven all the way down to collect signatures for. Once, his pen stopped. I had said something about Eleanor, and for half a second, his eyes went to the window, to the roses, to the 2 coffee cups still sitting on the counter from the morning. He was not a cruel man, I think. He was a weak one, doing a cruel thing for a fee, and some honest part of him knew it. Then the pen moved on, and so did he. He stayed 40 minutes. When he left, he shook my hand and said Mitchell was lucky to have such a sharp father. And the cruelty of that one word sharp sat in my chest for an hour after his car was gone. That night, I did what I had done nearly every night for 5 years. I made tea. I went to the bedroom, opened the nightstand drawer, and took out Eleanor's notebook, the small one. Dark green, soft at the corners from 25 years in her coat pocket. Every room we repaired. every rose she planted, the poems she wrote on the 97th step, her whole voice in her own hand, in a book that fit in one palm. I read for an hour. Then I set it where I always set it, upper right corner of the nightstand, spine to the wall, and turned off the light. In the morning it was gone. I checked the drawer, the other drawer, the floor, under the bed, the narrow gap between the nightstand and the wall. I searched that room the way I was trained to search a space quadrant by quadrant. Nothing assumed, nothing skipped, and then I searched the reading room, the study, the kitchen the same way. Eleanor's notebook was not in my house. I sat down on the edge of the bed in the gray morning light, and I made myself say the thing plainly, the way you must say true things plainly, or they will eat you from the inside. Someone had a key to my home. Someone had let themselves in while I slept, crossed my bedroom, and lifted my dead wife's voice off the nightstand 3 feet from my head. And whoever it was had stood over a sleeping old man in the dark and decided he was not even worth waking. A notebook is a small thing. A man can lose a notebook and go on living. But if someone had a key, then the notebook was the least of what I had to worry about. There was one thing in the lighthouse worth far more than my dead wife's handwriting to the people who had let themselves in, and I knew exactly where it was. I went down to the basement. The stairs are steep and narrow, no rail on the left side. Because the year we built them, we ran out of money for the rail and then ran out of the need. I went down with one hand on the cold stone, into the smell of damp concrete and sawdust, and something older underneath the smell of a room that holds more years than the ones above it. Eleanor's potting bench stood against the far wall. Clay still worked into the grain. My tools hung on their pegboard, every chisel in its place. In the corner, under the bare bulb, stood the gray steel cabinet where I keep every document that proves this lighthouse is mine. The deed, the survey, the title. 25 years of paper that says Henry Callaway, and not Coastal Apex Development. I took the key off my ring, the key I have carried for 25 years, whose weight I know like the weight of my own thumb, and put it in the lock. It did not fit. I pressed it slowly, thinking the cold had stiffened the mechanism. The key slid halfway and stopped. The lock had been changed. I knelt and looked, and there it was, new brass, bright against the scratched gray paint and the faint silver scars where a screwdriver had slipped during the work. Someone had come into my basement with tools and time and replaced the lock on the one cabinet that mattered. Taped beneath the new lock was a folded square of paper. I peeled it off and opened it. 4 lines, in a hand that was not mine. Originals transferred to Mitchell Callaway for safekeeping per verbal agreement. Copies remain on file. Contact Mitchell Callaway for access. For your protection. For your protection. I read those 3 words twice. There is a particular cruelty in them, robbery dressed in the coat of care. Theft handed to you in a soft voice with a steady hand. The way Mitchell had handed me papers across the kitchen table 3 months after I buried his mother. And here is where I will tell you the truth about myself. Because I promised I would. For about 10 seconds. I wanted to climb those stairs, pick up the telephone, and tell my son exactly what kind of man he had become. I wanted words I had not used since the Navy. My hands were shaking on the cabinet door. There is an old anger in me, older than Eleanor, older than the uniform, and it stood up in that basement and asked to be let off its chain. I did not let it off. I have learned what rage costs. If I called Mitchell that night, I would feel like a man for 10 seconds, and then he would know that I knew. And a man who is being robbed keeps his only advantage by letting the thief believe he is still asleep. So I folded the note, put it in my pocket, and made my anger sit back down. It is the hardest order I have ever given, and I gave it to myself. Then I let a memory come, because I could not stop it. A Saturday in June. Mitchell was 8, the first summer after his mother and I came apart. I took him to the old commercial dock at Cape May, the warm wood, the sun on the water, and I taught him to tie knots, the bowline, the cleat hitch, the figure 8. His small hands worked the rope with a patience that surprised me. I put my hands over his hands and said, "Every knot has to hold. Son, your life might depend on it someday." And he looked up at me with those serious eyes and believed every word. I stood in the basement of the Lighthouse, 45 years from that dock, and understood that my boy had learned to tie a different knot somewhere along the way. The kind not built to hold, the kind built to take that looks like safety right up until the moment it lets go. And a worse thought came with it. The way the worst ones always arrive uninvited. Where had he learned that knot not from me? I told myself, too quickly. But I was the man who taught him, at 11 years old, that people can be left. His mother and I taught him that together. I do not know how much of my son I made with my own hands. I have never been brave enough to sit down and count it. I climbed the stairs. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink and dried them on the cloth that hangs from the hook Eleanor set 30 years ago, in exactly the right place. I stood at the window and looked at the roses, the deep red ones bent in the evening wind, and I thought about roots, and how the thing that holds a house up is never the part you can see. The doorbell rang. I dried my hands and went to the door and opened it. A boy stood on the step, 17 years old, a backpack over one shoulder, his dark hair wet and flat against his forehead from a rain that had started while I was underground. He had Mitchell's jaw. He had Eleanor's eyes, that gray that turns green in a certain light. He was breathing hard, the way a person breathes when they have moved fast and are not yet sure they have come to the right place. And he looked at me with an expression I knew, because I had worn it myself an hour before, down in the basement. The face of someone who has just learned a thing they will never be able to unlearn. "Grandpa," Lucas said, "I need to show you something." I made him tea first. He was soaked through and his hands were cold, and whatever he had carried through the rain could wait the 3 minutes it took to heat water. That was Eleanor's lesson, not mine. You take care of the person before you take care of the problem. I was slow to learn it. I have tried to live by it since. Lucas sat at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the mug the same way I had gripped the cabinet door an hour before, and he said he was sorry. I asked what for. He said he did not know where to start. I told him to start wherever it hurt least. He opened a laptop and turned it toward me. Photographs of a screen, his mother's screen, taken on his phone over the last weeks and saved in a folder named with nothing but a date. The date was from around the Tuesday. I told you about the morning my son first asked how I was really doing. The first image was an email. Sharon's address at the top. A property described below a lighthouse and the land around it. Cape May, New Jersey. Assessed value, $1.2 million. Agreed sale price, $3.5 million, to Coastal Apex Development. And at the bottom, under a line that said authorization, my name, Henry Calloway, in my own handwriting. Except I had never written it. I looked at that signature a long time. It was good. Better than good. It had the slight leftward lean I picked up in my 40s. The particular way I bring the tail of the Y back up instead of carrying it down. Someone had studied my hand the way I once studied charts. I asked Lucas where they got it. He scrolled to the next picture. One paragraph. Sharon to Mitchell. She mentioned a birthday card. She had taken it from the house after the funeral, she wrote, because the signature on the back was clean and she had kept it in her desk drawer for 3 years. Waiting. Eleanor gave me that card the summer before she got sick. She signed the back, the way she always signed the back, never the inside. The inside is for everyone. Henry, she used to say. The back is just for you. I had kept it in the nightstand drawer, beside the green notebook, the drawer Mitchell offered to help me clean out on his first visit, being helpful. Sorting what to keep from what to throw away, I sat with that. Then I asked to see the rest. The next images were not emails. They were photographs taken inside my house. The reading room, the kitchen, my bedroom, in the dark. With a shape in the bed that was me. Time-stamped. Clear enough, I studied the angle, and I thought about every object in that room, and then I understood. Eleanor's flower basket, the woven one on the reading room shelf, the one I had never moved because moving it felt like erasing her. They had put a camera inside it. For weeks. My son's wife had watched me through my dead wife's flowers. Lucas said he was sorry again. I told him to stop and show me the rest. An email between Sharon and the man called Feldman. She asked if the report was strong enough. The documentation had to clearly support diminished capacity. She wrote, "The talking to the photograph is good, but we need more." Feldman answered that he would add the business about the meals and the confusion over dates, and that it would be sufficient for the filing. I asked what filing. He scrolled once more. A legal document, half cut off. Petition for guardianship of financial assets. My name. And below it, Mitchell Calloway. Proposed guardian. I thought that was the bottom of it. It was not. Near the middle of the folder was one more email I had almost passed over. A life insurance policy. Taken out on Henry Calloway 3 years ago, 3 months after Eleanor's funeral. Beneficiary, Mitchell Calloway. Value, $2 million. 3 months after the funeral. When I was so hollowed out, I would sign anything my son slid in front of me. The papers I told you about. The papers I never read. He sat beside me at his mother's burial. He held my arm at the graveside and told me he would take care of me. And 90 days later, he bet $2 million on the date of my death. I closed the laptop. In the basement. I had told myself I was a fool for 10 seconds. That was a comfortable lie. I had been a fool for 3 years. The truth was harder than the betrayal my son did not turn on me that autumn. He had been turned for a long time, and all those years I poured his coffee and asked about the Eagles and never once looked at the man across the table. I looked at Lucas instead. 17, soaked, frightened, braver than anyone his age should have to be. He had climbed out from under his own roof and run through the rain to put this in front of me, knowing what it would cost him at home. "Thank you," I said. "Now go home tonight and tell no one you were here." He asked what I was going to do. I was 79. They had money, a lawyer, a doctor, a buyer, and 3 years head start. I had a grandson, a cabinet I could not open, and a name in my own hand that I had never signed. I had also spent 30 years learning how to win when I could not win by force. "I'm going to do what I was trained to do," I said. "I'm going to plan a mission." I looked at Eleanor's photograph on the windowsill, the light behind her. the ocean behind the light. "It's time, Ellie," I said. "It's time." After Lucas drove off into the rain, I stood at the kitchen window a long time, watching the roses bend in the dark. Eleanor planted them on her knees at 63, working the soil with her bare hands because she did not trust anyone else to get the depth right. "The roots need room to go down," she told me, "before anything can go up." She said that about roses. She said it about most things. I knew what I had to do, and I hated it. I have spent my life as a man who carries his own weight. I built this lighthouse alone. I nursed my wife through 14 months without a nurse. Asking another man to drive through the night for me sits in my throat like a stone. But Eleanor was right about roots. And a man who tries to stand alone against money and lawyers and a forged signature is a man already falling. So at 11 o'clock, I picked up the telephone and dialed a number I had not dialed in 4 months. Frank Russo answered on the second ring. He is 82 and he does not sleep well. And he told me once that the only calls worth taking after 10 at night are the ones that matter. His voice was the same as it was in 1969. Low. Steady. A man who does not waste words on things that do not need them. "Frank," I said. "It's Henry. I need you." There was a pause of about 2 seconds. "I'll be there by morning," he said. I told him it was a 4-hour drive from Annapolis. He said he was aware of that. He arrived at 5:47. By the time I came down from checking the light, he had found the coffee and made it himself the way Frank operates in any kitchen he enters, as if he belongs there. Because 40 years in the Navy teaches a man that wherever he is standing is his post. We did not talk inside. We carried the whiskey up the 97 steps to the lantern room, the way we always took hard things to the highest ground we could find. The Atlantic spread out gray and enormous below us. I told him everything. Frank listened without moving, which was always his gift, the ability to be entirely present and entirely silent at once. When I finished, he was quiet a moment. Then he said, "You remember the constellation?" I remember everything about the constellation. Engine room fire. November of 69. The whole compartment going to smoke, and you came down the ladder when every other man was climbing up it. You put me over your shoulder and carried me out. He looked at the water. "I told you that night I'd pay it back someday." He turned his glass slowly in his hand. "Consider this the payment." Frank made 2 calls before 8 in the morning. The first was to a lawyer in Cape May named Diane Park, who had handled a veterans benefits case with him 3 years before. The second was to a man in Washington whose name he did not give me. Someone, he said, who owed him, and who could tell us what coastal apex development really was beneath the clean blue letterhead. I did not ask questions. Frank has always known people I do not, and I have always trusted his judgment about which of them are worth using. Diane Park was unlocking her office at 9 when we arrived. She is 55, the daughter of a Korean shipwright who came to Cape May in the 80s and built small boats in a shed on the north end of town. She grew up around the water and around men who made things with their hands. And I felt at once that she understood the particular weight of what I was trying to keep. She read through everything Lucas had photographed, slowly, in no hurry. When she finished, she set the papers down. "This is elder financial abuse," she said, "with a criminal forgery sitting underneath it. The camera in your home is a separate crime. And if I can prove this, Feldman wrote his report to order. That is a doctor who could lose his license." She looked at me. Give me a week to build it correctly. Then I told her the rest of what I wanted. I wanted Point Keeper made a historic landmark. She nodded, as if she had been waiting for me to say it. The Cape May Preservation Commission had a process, she said, and with the right materials it could be done, and once the designation held, the property could not be sold or developed for commercial use, no matter who held the deed or whose name was forged on what. How long, I asked. I can file in 48 hours, a preliminary ruling in about 3 weeks. Frank set down his coffee. 3 weeks is a long time. Henry, if they file that guardianship petition before your designation lands, or the moment they sense you know what you know, they move first, and they move fast, then you don't get to be the man who outran them. You get to be an old man in a courtroom, proving he isn't senile, which is exactly the picture they've already built. He was right. We were not safe. We were in a race, and the other side did not yet know they were running it. I drove home alone. I walked into the reading room and stood before Eleanor's flower basket on the shelf, the woven handle, the silk flowers, the camera hidden somewhere inside it that had watched me for weeks. I did not touch it. Standing there, I understood the one card they did not know I held. They were watching me, and they did not yet know that I had begun, at last, to watch back. I sat down in Eleanor's chair, the one that faces the shelf, the one that faces the lens. I let an old man's tired, vacant face settle over my own. I think I've got one last mission left in me. Ellie, I said. And I began to plan, very carefully, exactly what I wanted them to see. For 5 days, I became a man I was not. It was the strangest thing I have ever done. And I have done strange things. Stranger than combat. Stranger than sitting in the dark, holding Eleanor's hand and counting the seconds between her breaths as they came farther and farther apart. I sat in the rooms I had built with my own hands, in front of a camera hidden in my dead wife's flowers, and I performed the loss of my own mind for an audience I could not see but knew was always watching. It began on a Tuesday. I opened the cabinet where the coffee mugs are kept and let my hand hover there. Fingers spread, my mouth a little open, my eyes gone soft and far away. Now what was I looking for? I said out loud, to no one, to the lens. I held the pose the way an actor holds a moment too long enough for the camera to catch it. Long enough for whoever reviewed the footage in Philadelphia to write a line in a file. Then I shook my head, took down the mug, and made my coffee as if nothing at all had happened. I did not expect what it would cost me. Each time I let my face go slack. Each time I let my eyes empty out. I felt a small piece of my dignity stand up and leave the room. I was 79 years old, a man who had once carried another man out of a burning ship, and I was pretending to lose my mind in my wife's reading room for a camera in her flower basket. There is a particular humiliation in that, even when you are the one who chose it, especially then, and there was something worse underneath the humiliation. Something I did not say to Frank. I was afraid the lie would take. I would hold the empty face for the lens, and some cold voice in me would whisper that this was not acting, that it was a preview, that one day the fog I was pretending would arrive for real and never lift. To play a thing, you have to find it inside yourself first. I found it, and finding it frightened me more than Mitchell ever had. I performed it anyway. That is what the mission required. On Wednesday I called my son, and in the middle of the call, in a vague and pleasant voice, I asked him to give my regards to his mother the next time he saw her. His mother, my first wife, had been gone 11 years. There was a small silence on the line, and underneath it the soft fumbling of a man starting a recording. And then Mitchell said, very gently, "Dad, Mom passed away. A long time ago." I said, "Oh yes, of course, forgive me. I was thinking of someone else." And I heard him exhale. I heard the relief in it. I also heard the arithmetic. On Thursday, I sat in the reading room and held a book upside down for 3 full minutes, my lips moving over words that were standing on their heads. On Friday, I set 2 places at the table, put food on both plates, ate from one, and glanced now and then at the other as though someone sat across from me. When I was done, I scraped the full plate into the bin. That one was not entirely a performance. I have set 2 places at that table for 5 years. The difference was the camera and the knowledge that they would take this picture of a lonely old man eating supper with a ghost and use it to prove he could no longer be trusted with his own life. It worked. It worked beautifully, which is its own kind of grief. Mitchell began calling more often, his voice gone soft and slow. The voice people use on a man they believe is fading. He was worried about me out here alone, he said. He had found some lovely places, comfortable ones, near the water, assisted living. He named 3 of them and talked for 9 minutes, the longest he had spoken to me in 5 years, and I said, and yes, that sounds nice. And I listened to his confidence swell with every word. After we hung up, I sat a long while in Eleanor's chair and felt what it is to be written off by your own child. It was not rage. Rage I understood. This was quieter and worse, a thing that wore grief's coat and walked like it. On the last night I did the final piece. I sat in the reading room after dark and did not turn on the lamp. The only light came from the hall behind me and the faint pulse of the tower above. I looked toward the shelf, toward the basket, toward the lens I could not see, and I spoke not to the camera, exactly, to the room, to Eleanor, to whoever was listening on the other end of that wire. Our boy has forgotten what it means to be a Calloway, I said, but I have not. And I have got one last mission left in me. Then I turned off the hall light and went up to bed. I learned the rest later, after it was over, when Lucas told me how those nights had gone on the other side of the screen. Mitchell had watched that footage from his laptop, gone cold, and called Sharon in to see it. She watched it twice. Then she pointed at the screen and said, "He's talking to a photograph. Mitchell. He thinks he's talking to Eleanor. He doesn't know a thing." And she went back to her own laptop and sent one email. It went to Coastal Apex Development. It said Town Hall presentation confirmed for November 15th. Proceed. November 15th was 9 days away. She was wrong about what I knew. She was wrong about all of it. And 9 days was enough if nothing reached them first. But there was one loose thread in my whole plan I had not been able to cut. His name was Lucas, 6 days before the town hall, at 9:43 on a Tuesday night. The phone rang, and I knew before I answered that the thread had broken. It was Lucas the second time he had called me since the night he came through the rain. I picked up and heard his breathing before his voice, fast and shallow. The breathing of someone who has been running or crying or both. "Grandpa," he said. "They know." I sat down. I made my voice flat and level, the voice I once used on frightened sailors. "Tell me. Slowly. All of it." His mother had gone looking for a work file that evening, he said. And her email flagged a login from a device she did not recognize. She checked the history. She found the folder he had made, the one named with nothing but a date, opened it, and saw every screen he had photographed. She carried the laptop downstairs, set it on the kitchen table in front of him, and said one word: "Explain." He tried to lie. He was 17 and frightened, and he tried. And Sharon is not a woman you can lie to. She looked at him and said, not as a question, "You sent these to him." Then Mitchell came in from the other room. Lucas said he watched his father's face move through 3 things in a row: surprise, then something like fear, then the hard, flat thing a man puts on when he has decided to be angry instead of ashamed. Mitchell said, "Do you have any idea what you've done?" And then Lucas said the thing he had been holding in his chest for weeks. He looked at his father and said, "You're the one who did something. You're trying to take Grandpa's home. You promised Grandma you'd take care of him. I was there. I heard you, at her bed, and you lied." There was a silence on the phone. I did not fill it. Dad told me I'm 17, and I don't understand how business works," Lucas said. "He said it's a family matter that doesn't concern me." His voice cracked. "I told him he's my family too." Sharon took his phone. She took his laptop. She told him to go to his room while they decided what to do with him. And she wedged a chair under the handle of his door, not a lock, but it works well enough on a door that opens inward. He sat on his bed and listened to them argue through the floorboards, her voice sharp and low, his father's voice rising and falling, the way it does when he is being told what to think and is in the slow process of agreeing. And here, on my end of the line, 90 miles away, I made the hardest decision of the whole affair. Every part of me that is still a father stood up and reached for the truck keys. My grandson was locked in a room and afraid, and I could be on the road in 90 seconds. I have carried a man out of fire. The body knows what it wants to do. I made myself sit still, because if I drove to Philadelphia that night and pounded on that door, I would tell them with my own 2 fists that the old man knew everything and the mission would die, and the lighthouse with it. And Lucas would have risked all of it for nothing. The cruelest order I have ever given. I gave in that kitchen chair. Do not go to him. Talk him through it. Trust the boy you taught. "Lucas," I said, "listen to me. Is your window still above the garage roof?" It was. I knew that house. I talked him out onto the roof in his socks. Low and slow told him where to put his weight. Told him to hang from the edge and let his legs find the grass. I heard the scrape of the screen, the wind, his breath. I heard the soft grunt when he dropped. Then I heard him running. He ran 3 doors down to the Ostrowskis, whose daughter he had known since the 2nd grade, and knocked until they opened, and asked to use their phone. That was where he was calling me from. By then his voice had steadied the way a voice steadies once a person has passed all the way through the worst of their fear and come out the far side. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," he said. "I should have been more careful. You stop that right now." I told him, "You have nothing to be sorry for. You did what a Calloway does. You stood up for someone who needed you, and you did it when it cost you something, and that is the only kind of standing up that counts." He was quiet. "Now I need one more thing from you," I said. "On the 15th, there's a meeting at the town hall in Cape May. I don't care how you get there, bus, train, on foot, but you be in that room. What about Mom and Dad? Your mother and father are mine to handle. That is my job. Your job is to walk into that room and be a witness. Can you do that?" "Yes, Grandpa. Go home now. Sleep if you can." I held the phone a moment. And Lucas, thank you. I put the phone down, and for a moment, the soldier in me stepped aside and let the grandfather speak. I had let a 17-year-old carry a piece of my war. He had gone out a second-story window in his socks because of a plan I made at this table. That part was mine, and no verdict would ever settle it. After he hung up, I sat alone in the dark of the reading room, the camera still watching me from Eleanor's basket, and I let it watch. Let them see an old man sitting still in a chair. They had no idea what was sitting there with him. I looked at Eleanor's photograph on the sill, the faint light of the tower moving across the glass. "It's time, Ellie," I said. "For real, this time." And the next morning, the war began. On the morning of the 15th, I climbed the 97 steps one more time before the fight. The light was still burning from the night before. I stood at the top and looked out at the Atlantic, flat and gray and very still. The stillness that comes before weather turns. I thought about Eleanor standing in this exact spot the first afternoon we saw the place. She had looked at the water, then at me, and said, "This is it. Henry, this is where we are going to live." I looked at the broken glass and the leaning walls and said, "Ellie, I think you might be out of your mind." She laughed and said, "Probably, but build it anyway." I went down and made 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for her. I put on the navy blazer she bought me for our 40th anniversary, and I looked at myself in the glass. An old man in a good jacket, hands steady, eyes clear, not the face of a man who needs anyone at all to manage his affairs. The folder Diane had prepared sat on the kitchen table, every page behind a numbered tab. The preliminary approval from the Preservation Commission, which had come through 4 days before. The handwriting analysis from a specialist in Trenton. The screenshots Lucas had taken. The emails. The insurance policy. Feldman's report and the messages that ordered it written. 30 years in the Navy and I had never carried a cleaner operations file. The Cape May Town Hall is a white wooden building on Washington Street, with a meeting room on the second floor that holds about 70 people. By 3:30, it was half full business owners, 2 members of the planning committee, a reporter from the County Herald, a scatter of residents who had seen the notice about the development. I took a seat in the last row, near the door, the folder flat on my lap, and I waited. Frank came in 5 minutes later in his dress uniform, navy blue, gold buttons, the ribbons arranged in the order he could still recite in his sleep. He sat down beside me without a word, crossed his arms, and faced front like a man prepared to sit there until the sun came up. Diane slipped in through a side door and took a chair near the front. She did not look back at me. We had agreed that none of this could appear rehearsed. At 3:45, the silver Mercedes pulled into the lot. Mitchell got out in a charcoal suit and a blue tie. Sharon came around from the other side, carrying nothing, walking beside him without touching him. They climbed the stairs. Mitchell went straight to the front table and shook hands with a tall, gray-haired man in an expensive suit, the coastal Apex man, and the 2 of them smiled the way men smile when they are about to make each other a great deal of money. Sharon took the front row, crossed her legs, and looked around the room with the calm of a woman who had already decided how the afternoon would end. She did not look at the back. She did not see me. At 4:00, the chairman called the room to order and introduced the proposal, a commercial development on a parcel at the south end of Cape May. Presently, a private residence and a decommissioned lighthouse. Mitchell stood. He clicked to the first slide, and there it was. A bright, clean rendering of a glass and stone building rising out of the exact ground where Eleanor's roses grew. Cape May Lighthouse Resort and Spa, 200 rooms, a restaurant, a private marina, $45 million, 300 permanent jobs. He spoke for 12 minutes, and he was good at it, measured, warm, fluent in the words that open public meetings: sustainable tourism, heritage-adjacent design, economic renewal for a town that needed it. Two of the committee members were nodding before he reached his second slide. I looked at that rendering a long moment. The architects had drawn a paved plaza exactly where Eleanor knelt at 63 to set the roots. To everyone in that bright slide, it was only land. I was the one person in the room who knew what was being paved over and what it had cost to grow. I looked past him to the doorway behind the screen, and there was Lucas. Jeans, a backpack, those gray-green eyes finding mine across the whole length of the room. He had taken a bus on a Tuesday and slept somewhere I did not want to think about. And he had come. I gave him one small nod. He stepped inside and sat against the wall, half hidden behind the projector stand. And then, God help me, I felt the old pull. The room was leaning toward my son. His picture of me was already in the air, the confused old man. The report on the table. The photographs of a lonely supper for two. It would have been so easy to stay in that chair. To be invisible the way I had made myself invisible at Sunday dinners and graveside silences my whole life. To let the polite quiet swallow one more thing that mattered. For the length of one breath. I was afraid, not of Mitchell, of standing up and being seen. Then Mitchell finished, and the chairman asked if there were any questions from the public. I stood. The chair scraped against the old wood floor, loud in that room, and heads turned. Frank's did not he already knew. Mitchell was still facing the screen, and when he turned and saw me on my feet in the last row, his face went through three things in 2 seconds: recognition, confusion, and then something very close to fear. "Dad," he said, "what are you doing here?" I picked up my folder. I stepped into the aisle and walked toward the front, 79 years old. Back straight, the way the Navy taught me to walk into any room, as if I had every right to be there and no intention of leaving. "I came to tell the truth about this contract," I said, "and about my son." Mitchell moved faster than I expected. Before I had taken 3 steps down the aisle, he had already turned from the projector and lifted one hand toward the chairman, the easy, open hand of a man used to running rooms and unwilling to lose this one. "If I may, Mr. Chairman," he said, calm, courteous, the voice of a professional who needs the room on his side. The chairman nodded. Mitchell turned to face them all. He did not look at me. He looked at the committee behind their long table, then at the rows of residents, then at a point above everyone's heads, the way people look when they are about to say a thing they want to appear costly to say. Members of the committee, residents of Cape May, I am sorry for this interruption." A breath. "The man in the aisle is my father. His name is Henry Calloway. He is 79 years old, and he is not well." He let it land. He was good. God help me. He was good. My father is a decorated Navy veteran, and I am proud of his service. But this past year, his health has failed. He forgets dates, names, appointments. He holds conversations with people who are not in the room. He forgets to eat. He forgets to lock his own doors. He lives alone, on the water, in a tower with 97 steps, and every day he climbs them. And every day I wait for the call that says he didn't come down. He reached into his jacket, produced a document, and held it up. This is an evaluation by Dr. Feldman, a licensed psychiatrist, who examined my father 3 weeks ago. It finds early cognitive decline, consistent with the onset of dementia. It recommends supervised care and a financial guardian. He set it on the committee table, gently, the way you set down something fragile. Then his voice changed. It went soft and uneven. He looked at his shoes, then up. I know how this looks. I know some of you are thinking the worst of me, but I filed for guardianship because I am terrified. I have already buried my mother. I cannot stand here and watch my father disappear too alone, in a house he can no longer keep. His chin moved. I just want my dad to be safe. That's all. That's all I have ever wanted. And then my son cried. Not the loud kind. A single tear, wiped fast with the back of his hand, as though he were ashamed of it, as though he had not meant for anyone to see. And here is the thing I have not been able to set down in all the time since. I could not tell if it was real. I have watched Mitchell perform. I know his performing. But this was different, or it was the same, only better and somewhere beneath the calculation. I think a part of my son believed every word, believed he was the grieving boy and I was the failing old man, because that story let him sleep at night, and the true one never would. That is the part that frightened me most. Not the lie. The way he had told it to himself first. The room turned. I felt it go the way you feel a current take the hull. A woman at the end of the table put her hand over her mouth. Another nodded slowly. The residents who had turned to stare at me now looked away softly, the way you look away from a man you have decided to pity. Sharon sat in the front row, hands folded, her face arranged into the quiet concern of a loving daughter-in-law, and if I had not known what I knew, I might have believed her too. Frank did not move. He watched my son the way he once watched officers who falsified inspection reports. Patient, measuring, waiting for the lie to finish so the truth could have the floor. And against the far wall, behind the projector stand, Lucas had gone white. His hands gripped the edge of his chair. He was watching his father become a stranger in front of 70 people. And I knew that face, because I had worn it myself in the basement, for one breath, and I promised you, honesty, the performance was good enough to reach even me. The report on the table, the tear, the pity rising off the room like heat. A small, cold voice asked whether they could all be right, and I could be the only man here who did not know. That is what they had built. Not a lie about my mind. A trap shaped exactly like one. I let the voice speak. Then I let it go. I knew what I had climbed those 97 steps for that morning. The chairman set down the Feldman report. He took off his glasses and looked at me, not unkindly. "Sir," he said, "the gentleman has raised concerns about your capacity. Do you have anything you would like to say in response?" 70 people. A son who may have half believed his own story. A wife who believed nothing and feared less. A committee already leaning toward the weeping man and the failing father. A doctor's signature on the table, and behind it all, still glowing on the screen, the thing they meant to raise where my wife's roses grew. "I do," I said. "May I?" He gestured me forward. I walked the rest of the way down the aisle. I set my folder on the edge of the committee table. I turned to face the room, and I planted my feet the way the Navy taught me to stand when I needed a room full of people to stop and listen. And I let the silence fill the room slowly, completely, until there was no space left in it for anything but what I was about to say. I did not raise my voice. I have never found much use in raising it. The Navy taught me that the quietest man in a room is usually the one most worth hearing, and I have carried that the way I carry most of what the Navy gave me quietly, permanently, without making a show of it. My son told you I am not well, I said. He told you I forget things. He told you I talk to people who are not in the room. Let me tell you what I do remember. I remember buying a ruin in 1999, and a woman named Eleanor standing in front of it telling me to build it anyway. I remember 25 years of doing exactly that. I poured the foundation. I rebuilt 97 steps, one at a time. I relit a lamp at the top of that tower that had been dark since 1962. My wife planted the garden along the east wall and built the bookshelves with her own hands, because she did not trust anyone else to get the height right. And every morning for the 5 years since she died, I have climbed those 97 steps to keep her light burning, including this morning, before I drove here to stand in front of you. The room was very quiet now. I let them look at me, not the failing man Mitchell had drawn, but the one who climbs 97 steps in the dark and can account for every one of them. My son also told you I signed a contract to sell this property. What he did not tell you is how I signed it. I looked at Mitchell. He had gone still beside the projector. 3 months after my wife's funeral, my son took a birthday card from my nightstand. It was the last card Eleanor ever gave me. She signed it on the back. The way she always signed the back, never the inside. The inside is for everyone, she used to tell me. The back is just for you. I let it sit. My son took that card, and he traced her husband's name off the back of it onto a $3.5 million contract. He sold my home with a dead woman's birthday card. The room changed. I felt it turn the way you feel a tide turn, not all at once, but completely. The whole weight of the water shifting to run the other way. Diane rose from her seat near the front, walked to the committee table, and opened her briefcase. She did not hurry. She laid down the handwriting analysis from the Trenton specialist the signature traced, not written by hand. She laid down screenshots of Sharon's own emails describing the use of the card. She laid down the documentation of a camera installed inside my home, without my knowledge, hidden in a basket of my late wife's flowers. She read Sharon's words aloud, flat and clear. Make the report stronger. The talking to the photograph is good, but we need more. She set down the insurance policy, $2 million on my life, taken out 3 months after I buried my wife. Beneficiary Mitchell Calloway, signed in a season when I was so hollowed by grief that I would have signed anything my son put in front of me. With each page, the sympathy drained out of that room the way color drains from a sky before a storm. Where there had been pity for the weeping man, there was now the particular cold anger of people who have just learned they were lied to by someone who wept while he did it. The coastal apex man had leaned back and crossed his arms, already measuring how far he needed to stand from all of this. I watched Sharon while Diane read. She did not flinch, and she did not look at her husband. While Mitchell's face came apart in front of 70 people, she sat with her hands folded and her eyes moving not in fear, in arithmetic. The forgery was in Mitchell's hand. The signature was Mitchell's name. She was already measuring how little of this would ever reach her. Then Diane laid down the last page. "This is the preliminary approval of the Cape May Historic Preservation Commission," she said, designating Point Keeper Lighthouse a protected landmark. Under New Jersey statute, a property with this designation cannot be sold, demolished, or developed for commercial use. Effective immediately. The chairman picked it up. He read it once. He read it again. He set it down very carefully, as though it weighed more than paper. I looked at my son across that room. I thought of an 8-year-old on a dock with a rope in his hands, looking up at me as if I were the last word on what was true. And I thought of the man in the charcoal suit who had traced his mother's gift into a forgery. They were the same person. Learning that, and standing there knowing it, was the heaviest thing I carried out of that room. There was one more thing in the inside pocket of my blazer. My fingers found it while Diane spoke small, leather, worn soft at the corners. The thing I had drawn out of the wall 3 days before, from behind the loose brick on the 91st step. The last thing my wife ever wrote. I had thought, that morning, that I might read it here when the moment came. Lay her voice on the table beside the forgery and the camera and the policy, and let it finish them. I left it in my pocket. Some things you do not spend in a room full of strangers. Eleanor had not written it for a committee, or for Mitchell, or for the County Herald. She had written it for me. Whatever she had to say, I would hear it the way she meant it alone, in the house we built, with the door shut and the light on. I closed my hand around it once. Then I let it go and turned back to the room. There was still the matter of a vote, and there was still the matter of my son. For a moment, no one moved. The chairman held the landmark approval in one hand, with the Feldman report at his elbow, and the whole room sat in the silence that comes after a thing has been said that cannot be unsaid. Then, in the last row, Frank Russo stood up. Dress uniform, gold buttons, 82 years old and straight as a mast. He did not raise his voice either. He had learned that in the same place I had. I served with this man for 30 years, he said. In November of 1969, he came down a ladder into a burning engine room when every other man aboard was climbing up it, and he carried me out over his shoulder. I am alive because of Henry Calloway. I drove 4 hours to sit in this room. I would have driven 40. He sat down. And before the chairman could speak, another man stood. Earl Henderson, 77, a retired electrician with hands like mine. Henry rewired my whole house after the storm of '08, he said. Took him 3 days. Wouldn't take $1. Said that's what neighbors are for. He sat. Then Hank Moretti, 79, a former Marine who does not say much. I broke my hip the winter my wife was on chemo. Henry drove her to Vineland and back every Tuesday for 6 months. Never missed one. Never mentioned it. He sat. Then Douglas Fife, 81. Who carried the mail in this town for 40 years. He stood slower than the others. After my Margaret passed, I had a plan to drink myself into the ground, and I was making good progress. A low, sad laugh moved through the room. Henry Calloway is the reason I'm standing here instead. He's the reason I'm standing at all. He sat. Then a woman stood without waiting to be recognized. Rosa Delgado, who runs the diner on Lafayette. When my Eddie was dying, she said, this man drove out every Sunday with a thermos and sat with him so I could sleep 2 hours. He never once let me thank him. She did not sit down right away. She turned and looked at Mitchell, and her voice dropped. You don't know your own father, son. That is the saddest thing in this room. And then they kept standing, one after another. Around that room, neighbors, veterans, a young man whose boat I had helped him build, a widow from the church on Hughes Street. 12 people in all. No one had told them to come. No one had rehearsed a word. They simply stood, each in turn, and said what kind of man I was not, because I had ever told them, but because they had watched me, year after year, climb 97 steps to keep a light burning that no ship needed and no law required. I will tell you what that did to me, because it is not what you would think. It did not make me proud. It shamed me. A little. For 5 years I had decided I was alone out on that point. I had made a private religion of it: 2 cups of coffee, a locked basement, a silence I called strength. And all that time, these people had been 3 doors down and 1 town over. Ready. I had not been alone. I had only stopped letting anyone in. It took my son trying to take everything for me to see that the door I kept shut had always been my own. The chairman cleared his throat and called for a vote. The committee voted, every hand, to reject the coastal apex development. They voted, every hand, to affirm Point Keeper Lighthouse as a protected historic landmark. It could not be sold. It could not be razed. It could not be made into a spa with a marina where Eleanor's roses grew. The lighthouse was safe, but I had spent 30 years learning the difference between winning a battle and ending a war. And I knew which one this was. A town hall is not a court. The guardianship petition still sat somewhere in a county system. The forgery had been exposed in this room, but the law had not yet moved a single inch. And when I looked to the front row to see how Sharon was taking it, her chair was empty. She had gone while Diane was still reading. No one had seen her leave. The architect of the whole thing had slipped out the side door the moment the wind changed. The way she did everything quietly, early, already 3 steps into whatever came next. The forgery had been Mitchell's hand and Mitchell's name. She had built the machine and kept her fingerprints off the trigger, and now she was gone, already counting, already deciding who would pay and who would not. My son had not gone. Mitchell stood alone beside the dead projector in his charcoal suit, and his face held the particular emptiness of a man who has watched everything he planned collapse in 20 minutes, and who has just begun to understand that the person who planned it with him is no longer in the room. Then Lucas came across the floor. He walked the whole length of it past the committee, past the coastal apex man gathering his coat, past his own father. He did not stop. He did not look at him. He came to where I stood and put his arms around me, and I put mine around him, and he was shaking. And so, I think, was I. The room emptied slowly around the 2 of us, and we stood in the middle of it and held on. I had kept the lighthouse. I looked over the boy's shoulder at my son standing alone, and at the empty chair where his wife had been, and I understood exactly what it had cost. Winning is never free, and the one who had cost me the most was the one I had not laid a finger on. She came back 3 days later, alone, in a black rental sedan I did not recognize. Not the silver Mercedes, the kind of car a person drives when they would rather not be known by their own. Sharon got out in a dark coat and flat shoes, no jewelry, no performance left in her. She walked through Eleanor's garden gate without waiting to be asked, and came to where I stood among the bare winter roses. "We need to talk," she said. I took her inside. She sat down at the kitchen table in Eleanor's chair, the one that faces the window, the one my wife drank her coffee in every morning for 25 years. I do not think Sharon knew whose chair it was. I do not think she would have cared. I did not offer her coffee. I sat across from her and waited. She did not cry. She did not apologize. She did none of the things a person does when they have been caught at what she had been caught at. She looked at me with clear, steady eyes and a level voice, and said the thing she had driven all this way to say. "You think this is over. It isn't. I said nothing. I still have 3 weeks of footage of you talking to a photograph and eating dinner for two. I still have Feldman's report. The town hall was theater. Henry, it carries no legal weight. I can file for guardianship in state court tomorrow morning. And then it's depositions, discovery, experts, appeals, years of it. She let the words settle. You are 79. You don't have years. I can make the rest of your life about nothing but this, and I will, unless you become very reasonable, very fast. I sat in the kitchen where Eleanor and I had eaten 10,000 meals, and I looked at this woman who had married my son and quietly carved the man out of him. And I felt something I had not expected. Not anger. I had spent my anger. What I felt was clarity, the cold, clean clarity that comes when you finally see a thing exactly as it is and stop being afraid of it. You're right, I said. I don't have years. I might have 10. I might have 2. None of us knows the number. She waited. But I have something you do not. I have people who will say my name with love after I'm gone. I have a grandson who climbed out a second-story window and ran through the dark because he decided I was worth protecting. I have a room full of neighbors who stood up for me without being asked. I looked at her. Can you say the same? Sharon. In your whole life, is there one person who would climb out a window for you? For a moment I thought I had reached her. I had not. Nothing moved behind her eyes, no hurt, no shame, not even surprise. Whatever lived in there had been set in place a long time ago, in some room I will never see, and it was not going to be moved by an old man's words at a kitchen table. She was exactly who she had been when she walked in, and she would be exactly that when she walked out. Across from her, I had a colder thought than any she had brought. I was almost certain I was not the first old man to sit in a kitchen like this one while Sharon explained, in that same level voice, exactly how the rest of his life was going to go. There was too much practice in it. Too little nerve. Diane, it turned out, had begun to wonder the very same thing, and here is my own confession for this part of it. I had reached for that question like a blade, meaning to cut her, and it struck nothing. And the wanting to cut her had cost me a little of my own quiet. You do not climb down into the mud with a person like Sharon and come back up clean. For one moment. I had wanted to be cruel. I am not proud of how good it felt. She stood, picked up her purse, and walked to the door. Then she stopped and turned back and gave me the last thing she had carried all this way to deliver. My Eleanor never told me she wanted you to sell the Lighthouse, she said. I made that up. There was no deathbed wish. I just thought you should know. Then she left. I sat a long while after the sound of her car was gone. Then I got up, took a clean cloth from the drawer, and wiped down Eleanor's chair, the seat, the arms, the back, the way you clean a thing that has been touched by hands that had no right to it. I learned the rest from Diane over the next 2 weeks. Sharon filed for divorce. She kept the house in Philadelphia. She kept the accounts. She took everything still worth taking and left behind the one thing that no longer was my son. The forgery had been in his hand and his name. She had built the machine and kept her own prints off every part of it. She walked away clean. She had always meant to. Mitchell did not. The Cape May County prosecutor served him that same week forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, fraud. Diane said the charges could carry years. Coastal Apex withdrew from the project and sued him for the $500,000 deposit he had already taken and spent. In 14 days, my son lost his wife, his work, his name, and possibly his freedom. I stood on the front step that evening and watched the light come on over the water. And I thought about a boy on a dock with a rope in his small hands, and about the knots that are built to hold, and the ones that only look like it. Mitchell would answer for his. Sharon would answer for nothing, not in any courtroom in this state. But I was not finished with her. And 3 days found, and 5 years gone. Neither was Eleanor. Diane came out to the Lighthouse on a Thursday with a folder of her own. And before she sat down, she said, "You were right about her. You weren't the first. She had pulled a thread," she said. And the man in Washington that Frank knew had pulled another. And the two ran to the same place. 11 years ago, in a town outside Harrisburg, a widower named Walter Brune had signed his house over to a company no one could quite trace 3 months after a young woman moved in to help him manage things. The woman used a different last name then. The photograph on the old filing was younger, but it was her. Walter Brune had died 2 years after he signed, in a care home in Mechanicsburg, with no one left to bring him his coffee in the morning. His daughter found the paperwork only after the funeral. By then, the young woman who had helped him manage things was already 3 states away, managing someone else. There may be more, Diane said. There usually is, with this kind. They move. They change the name. They find another lonely man with a house and no one watching. You weren't a son's mistake. Henry, you were a business. Then she told me the part that turned my stomach worse than the forgery had. Sharon had a side arrangement with Coastal Apex, a finder's fee, set down in a separate agreement, a share of the sale that would have come to her alone. Not to Mitchell, to her. My son believed he was the one running the play. He was the name on the contract, the face at the town hall, the hand that traced the signature. He was the one the prosecutor charged. And all of it, every risk, every charge sat on him, while the money that mattered ran quietly to a woman who had already packed her bags. She had not only stolen from me, she had used my son as the lever and the fall guy both. And she had meant to from the first day. I want to be honest about what that did to me. For 3 weeks, I had hated Mitchell with a clean, simple hatred, and God forgive me. It had almost been a comfort. Now Diane had handed me a complication I did not want. My son had done every ugly thing with his own 2 hands, and he had also been somebody's mark. He was a thief who had been robbed blind by the person he trusted most. I did not yet know what a man is supposed to do with 2 true things that will not lie down together. Here is what matters now, Diane said, and leaned forward. She threatened you with that footage. Let her. Every frame of it is the crime, not the proof of one. You cannot hide a camera in a man's bedroom in this state and call it evidence. You call it a felony. Her own emails ordered the camera and ordered the report. The forgery was Mitchell's hand. The surveillance and the fabricated diagnosis are hers in her words, with her name on them. The day she walks into a courtroom waving that tape, she hands the prosecutor the rope and ties the knot herself. I sat with that a while. Then Diane said the thing she had really driven out to say. We can do this 2 ways. I can refer all of it, the pattern, the Brune matter, the surveillance, the side agreement to the prosecutor, and to a reporter I trust at the Inquirer. And we can make Sharon's name a thing she cannot outrun in any town she moves to next. Or we hand the law what it needs. Let it grind quietly. And keep your grandson's face out of the papers. She looked at me. That is your call. Not mine. But you should make it as the man you want to be when this is over. Not the one you have had to become to survive it. And there it was. The choice I had been circling since the basement. Part of me, the part that had reached for Sharon like a blade across my own kitchen table, wanted to burn her down to the foundation. I wanted her name in every paper in 3 states. I wanted the widows of the men she had not yet been caught with to see her face. I am 79 years old. I have buried a wife and nearly lost the home we built. And I will not pretend the wanting was small. It sat in my chest like a coal that would not go out. But I had learned, the hard way, in this very house, that you do not climb down into the mud with a person like Sharon and come up clean. And there was Lucas to think of, a boy who had already lost his family to the truth and did not need to lose what was left of his name to a headline. I could not make that decision sitting in the kitchen. I had reached the far edge of what an angry old man's judgment was worth, and I knew it. So I thanked Diane and walked her to her car. And when she was gone, I went up to the reading room and took out of my blazer the small leather book I had carried for 3 weeks. I had read it once the night I pulled it from the wall, and it had put me on my feet and sent me to that town hall. I had not let myself read it slowly since. I had been too busy fighting to sit still and listen. Now the fighting was nearly done. There was one question left that I could not answer alone, and only one person had ever been able to answer it for me. The same person who had told me 25 years ago to build the impossible thing anyway. I sat down in Eleanor's chair in the last of the afternoon light, and I opened my wife's letter to read it the way she had meant it to be read. The handwriting was smaller than it used to be. The hand that wrote it had been tired and sick and running out of pages, but it was hers, the slight upward cross on the T, the small circle over the I she never grew out of. I would know it among 1,000 hands. I read it once, fast, the way you read a thing you are afraid of. Then I made myself read it the way she meant it, slowly, in her voice, which has never once left my ear. She wrote, "My dearest Henry, if you have found this, then I was right, and I am so sorry to have been right. I have had a great deal of time at this window these last months, more than a person should want, and time at a window makes you watch. I have watched our boy, and I have watched the way his wife looks at this house. A person can tell the difference, Henry, between someone looking at a home and someone looking at a price. Sharon looks at our roses and does sums. I did not want to say it while I was dying, because you had enough to carry, and because I kept hoping I was only a frightened woman seeing shadows. But if you are reading this, the shadows had teeth after all. So let me say the things I will not be there to say. First, I never wanted you to sell this place. Not for any price. Not for any reason. Not at the end and not after. If anyone ever tells you that I did that, I whispered some last wish to be rid of it, they are lying. And they are using my name to do it. And you must not believe them for a single second. I asked you to keep the light on. That was my wish. That was the only one. Second, and harder. I know you, Henry Calloway. I have loved you 30 years and watched you go very quiet and very cold when someone you trusted let you down. I have seen the door you close, and I'm afraid that when this is over, you will want to win the way they fought to take. because you were taken from, to burn the whole field so nothing grows there again. My love, do not. That is not strength. The men who take always tell themselves it is strength. You taught Mitchell to tie a knot that holds. Do not let what he became teach you to tie the other kind. You are the light at the top of our tower. A light does not chase the ships. It does not punish the dark. It stands where it is and burns, so that whoever is lost out there can still find the way home. Be that. Be the thing you built. Let the law do the cold work. You keep the warm. And there is a boy in this family, Henry. There is always a boy worth saving. Do not spend him on your anger. Whatever else you do, leave him a clean name and an open door. Now pour 2 cups in the morning. The way you do, I know you do. You stubborn man, and drink yours. And let mine go cold on the sill. And know that I am not gone so much as moved. The way light moves when it passes through glass. Build it anyway. You always did. Your Eleanor. I sat in her chair a long time after I finished. The light went down over the water, and I let the dark come. She had answered the question I could not. Of course she had. She had answered it before I ever knew to ask it, sealed it inside a wall, and trusted me to dig it out when the asking finally came. I would not burn Sharon down. Not because she did not deserve the fire. She deserved every spark of it. But because Eleanor was right. The way she was usually right. The men who take always call it strength. And I had spent a whole life being something better than that. And I would not trade it now for the brief, ugly warmth of watching a cruel woman suffer. I would hand the law what it needed, the footage that was her own crime, the Brune matter, the side agreement, and let it grind quietly. Lucas would keep his name. The papers would never get his face. The coal in my chest did not go out, but it cooled. The way a coal cools once you finally set it down. And the lie went into the ground where it belonged. There had been no deathbed wish. Sharon had invented one and swung my wife's name like a hammer. And I had passed a night or two half believing a dead woman could have wanted me gone from the only place she ever called home. I did not have to wonder any more. I held her true wish in my 2 hands, in her own tired writing. Keep the light on. That was all of it. That was everything. I got up and went down to the kitchen. It was nearly dark, and I did the thing I had done 10,000 mornings. I rinsed 2 cups and set them by the pot for the morning. 1 for me, 1 for her. I called Diane that night and told her the measured way. She said she had hoped I would. She said Eleanor must have been quite a woman. I told her she was. Then I told her she still is the only true thing I know how to say about her. There was still my son to face, and the question of what a father owes a child who tried to bury him, and there was the weather. It had been stacking up out over the Atlantic all that week, dark and heavy. And I had been too busy fighting for my life to climb my own tower and read it the way 30 years at sea taught me to. I should have read it. The law did its cold work quietly, the way I had asked it to, and the way Eleanor would have wanted. I never had to lift a hand against Sharon. She did that herself. Diane had been right. A person who has gotten away with a thing for 11 years cannot quite believe the day will come when she does not. 2 weeks after she sat in my kitchen and promised me years of court, she made her move. She had a new lawyer file notice that she intended to use the footage 3 weeks of a confused old man in a state guardianship action to prove I could not be trusted with my own affairs. She walked into the trap on her own 2 feet. Because the moment that tape entered a courtroom, it stopped being evidence about me and became evidence about her. You cannot hide a camera in a man's bedroom and a doctor at his kitchen table and call it lawful evidence. Diane handed the prosecutor what he needed: the surveillance, the emails in Sharon's own words, the Brune matter 11 years cold, the side agreement with Coastal Apex that proved she had run the whole thing for a fee she meant to keep for herself. The architect who had been so careful to keep her prints off the trigger had wrapped both hands around the barrel and pulled. I felt no joy in it. I was only tired, and a little sad the way you are sad watching any creature ruined by the thing it could not stop doing. My son was a different matter. Mitchell came on a Sunday in December, alone, in the rain. Not the silver Mercedes, a small, older car, parked crooked in the drive with one tire in Eleanor's flower bed. He got out and stood beside it a long moment, the way men stand outside hospitals. He had no umbrella. He was thinner, and his jacket was one I had never seen, the kind of coat you buy when the clothes that matched your old life no longer fit the one you are living. I opened the door and stood on the step. He stopped 10 feet short of it. The distance between us was not 10 feet. It was 5 years. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. His voice broke on it. I had watched my son perform in front of 70 people, and I knew his performing, and this was not that. This was a word giving way under a weight it could not carry. "For what?" I said. I needed to hear him say it. Rain ran down his face and he let it. "For the signature, for Mom's birthday card, for the camera, for Feldman, for the insurance." He stopped. "For not coming back after Eleanor died, for breaking the promise I made her at her bed. I told her I would take care of you, and I did the opposite, and I knew the whole time I was doing it." I let him stand in the rain with that. Then I told him to come inside. I made coffee. He wrapped both hands around the cup the way Lucas had, the way I had around a cabinet door, the same blood reaching for the same warmth, and I made a decision I had turned over for a week. I told him the truth about his wife. I told him about Walter Brune, about the different name, about the finder's fee written to her alone, and the contract written to him. I told him he had not been Sharon's partner. He had been her tool and her shield, chosen because a son who forges his own father is a son who goes to prison while the wife walks free. I watched it reach him, the slow understanding that the woman he had burned his whole life down for had been holding the match to him all along. He did not cry again. He went very still, the way a man goes still when the floor he is standing on turns out to be water. "She used me," he said. Quiet. Almost a question. She used both of us," I said. "The difference is, I had people who would not let me drown. You will have to go and find out whether you have any of those left." Then he asked me if I could forgive him. This was the hardest part, harder than the basement, harder than the town hall. Every soft thing in me wanted to say yes and end his suffering, because he is my son, and I am built to love him whether he earns it or not. That is the oldest mistake I own. For 45 years, I confused showing up with being let in, and tried to love a man into loving me back, which Eleanor told me long ago you cannot. So I did not hand him cheap grace. He had not earned it, and cheap grace would have insulted us both. "I am not closing the door," I said. But it is not open, either. It is exactly where you put it. And it will stay there until you move it, not with one apology in the rain, but with years. With the slow, unglamorous work of being a decent man when there is nothing in it for you and no one is watching. I looked at him. "Can you do that?" "I don't know," he said. "That," I told him, "is the first honest thing you have said to me in 10 years. He finished his coffee and stood to go. At the door, he looked up at the tower, where the light was burning into the gray afternoon, and he said, quietly, "You still keep it on." "Every night," I said. He drove away slow, and as his taillights faded down Eleanor's walk, I felt the air change against my face, that thick, falling pressure I had spent 30 years learning to read and had ignored all week. The rain that brought my son was only the front edge of it. The real weather was still out there over the water, stacking and turning, and it was coming for the light. The storm came at 2 in the morning, and I was awake to meet it. I had not slept. I had lain in the dark for hours, listening to the wind change its mind, first a thin whistle in the eaves, then something with a shoulder behind it, the kind of wind that does not go around a thing but through it. The old timber of the tower groaned the way timber groans when it is asked to hold more than it was built to hold. The rain, when it came, did not fall. It was thrown. It hit the windows sideways, hard as gravel, and beyond the glass there was only black water moving every direction at once. I lay there and read it the way the sea taught me. I thought about the foundation I had poured in 2003, the bolts in the tower casing, the drainage along the east wall. I asked myself which of them would hold. Then the lightning came, not the far flicker I had watched all week from the platform. This was on top of us, a crack that split the air directly above the tower, so loud it was less a sound than a hand laid flat against the whole building, a blow I felt in my chest. The room went white, then black, and in that black, I saw what was missing. For 25 years, lying in this bed, there had been a faint amber glow coming down the stairwell, the light at the top, reflected down through the spiral, all the way to the ground floor. Eleanor used to call it the lighthouse breathing. It was the last thing I saw before sleep and the first I looked for waking. It was gone. The stairwell was black. The light was out. I lay one moment longer and had the only argument worth having. A reasonable man waits for morning. A reasonable man calls an electrician. A reasonable man does not climb 97 steps in a tower swaying in a storm at 79 years of age, on knees that file grievances on a calm day. To chase a light, no ship needs tonight. I knew all of that. I have spent my life respecting all of that, but I had made a promise to a dying woman, and the promise had no clause in it for bad weather. I put on my boots. I took the flashlight from the hook by the door, and I started up. The first 30 steps were only steps. At 40, the tower moved under me not much, a few millimeters, the building giving to a force it had not felt in years, and I put my hand flat against the cold stone and kept on. At 60, water was running down the inside of the wall through a crack in the mortar I had not known was there, pooling on the stone, and I slowed and tested each tread before I trusted it with my weight. At 77, my left knee locked. I stopped, my shoulder against the wall, breathing through it. And while I waited for the joint to let go, I asked myself the hardest question of the night. Whether this was courage or only an old man's vanity. Whether keeping a light burning is love or just a refusal to let a dead woman finish dying. I had no clean answer. I am not certain there is one. But the knee released, and I went on. Because some questions you answer with your feet and not your head. At 91, the step creaked under me, the way it always has, and the loose brick was there in the wall beside it, the hiding place. Empty now, where she had left me her voice. I touched it with 2 cold fingers as I passed. Then I climbed the last 6 steps to the top. The lantern room was chaos. Rain poured through a split in the glazing where the bolt had struck. But the lens was whole. And at the junction box on the north wall, I found the wound a blackened wire, a blown fuse, the fixable consequence of a strike on a system I had kept 25 years and knew the way I know my own hands. I opened the box. I changed the fuse from the spares in the cabinet. I stripped the burned wire with my pocket knife, my fingers wet and stiff and clumsy, twisted the copper and taped it. My hands did what they have always done, which is the work in front of them. I closed the box. I threw the switch. The light came on. It filled that little room the way sunrise fills a room all at once, from everywhere, and poured out through the lens into the storm, cutting the rain and the dark in every direction, the way it had every night for 25 years. I stood in the middle of it while the tower swayed and the Atlantic raged below, wholly indifferent to what one old man had just done. I did not mind its indifference. I had not done it for the ocean. I climbed back down, slow, my knee aching. The flashlight dead, but the stairwell no longer dark, the amber pulse coming down the spiral again. The lighthouse breathing. The storm broke just before dawn. The clouds pulled apart like a curtain, and behind them was the cleanest sky I had seen in months. Washed and deep and new, the kind of sky that only comes after something violent has passed through. I carried 2 cups of coffee up to the top. I sat on the step where Eleanor used to write her poems, and I looked out at the water, calm now, silver in the first light. Still standing, Ellie, I said. Still standing. And it came to me that I had spent a whole year fighting to keep something, and that keeping a thing is only worth the trouble if you then do something with it. The light was on. The house was saved. The only question left was what an old man does with the years he had fought so hard to hold. It is autumn again. A year past the worst of it. And this morning I taught a 13-year-old named Marcus to tie a bowline. He is not my grandson. He is a boy from town whose father is somewhere he should not be, and who comes out to the lighthouse on Saturdays with 8 or 9 others. Because there is a program now, and the program needs someone to show them how things are made and mended. I am that someone. We meet in the workshop in the mornings. I teach them to wire a lamp, read a tide chart, sand a board with the grain, fix a thing instead of throwing it out and buying a new one. And I teach them knots because a boy who can tie a bowline has one true thing he can count on in a world that will lie to him about most others. I put my hands over Marcus's hands on the rope, the way I once put them over another boy's hands on a dock, the way that other boy, grown now and gone wrong and slowly trying to come back, has told me he still remembers. Every knot has to hold. I told Marcus, your life might depend on it someday. He looked up the way they do, deciding whether to believe me. He decided to. That is the result of the year I told you about. Not the headlines. This. The lighthouse is open now. I unlocked it, not just the front door, which I had been opening to strangers for months by then, but the whole locked habit of myself. For 5 years, I had kept this place sealed like a held breath, 2 cups, a bolted basement, and a silence I had the nerve to call strength. It was not strength. Eleanor knew that, and had the decency to tell me so in a letter she hid in a wall, because she knew I would not hear it any other way. The hardest door I ever opened was not the one to the public. It was the one I had shut on everyone who tried to stand beside me. Frank comes down from Annapolis most months and pretends he is checking the wiring. Diane sends her grandchildren to the Saturday program. Earl and Hank and Douglas have made themselves the unofficial guides, and they tell visitors stories about me that are about 40% true, which is the correct ratio for a friend. Sharon was convicted in the spring. The footage she swore would end me ended her instead that. And a widower named Walter Brune, 11 years gone, who finally got an answer no one had bothered to find for him while he was alive. I do not think about her much. A person with nothing in her worth keeping does not earn much room in the years a man has left. That is all I will say about Sharon. It is more than she would say about me. Mitchell I think about every day. He works in a hardware store in Trenton now. He has not asked me for money, or for forgiveness, or for anything at all, which is the first sign in 20 years that he understands what he did. In August, without telling me he was coming, he drove down and spent a Saturday in my workshop, not saying much, helping a 10-year-old build a birdhouse. And then he got back in his small old car and drove home. He has done it 3 times since. He has moved the door, perhaps an inch. It is the slowest, least glamorous work there is being decent when there is nothing in it for you and he is doing it. One plain Saturday at a time. And I have decided to let myself notice. Lucas starts at Columbia this fall. He means to study history, the keeping of records, the holding of what would otherwise be lost, which is a roundabout way of saying he wants to be a keeper, and came by it honestly. He still comes on weekends. He still climbs the 97 steps with me in the mornings, and lets me go first and slow, and never once lets me feel the slowness. I am 80 now. I tell you that plainly, because a man who has just spent a year insisting he is not finished should be honest about the arithmetic. My knees are worse than they were the morning of the storm, and the climb takes longer. I do not know how many winters of 97 steps are left in me. That is the real reason I teach the boys to wire a lamp and read a tide chart and tie a knot that holds. A light is only as permanent as the hands that have learned to keep it. People ask me sometimes, visitors who have heard the story, what the lesson is. They want something they can carry home in one sentence. I tell them I am not sure there is one that small, but if they press me, I tell them this. I spent my whole life believing that strength was what a man could carry alone. I was wrong. And being wrong nearly cost me everything I loved. Strength is the light at the top of the tower. It does not chase anyone down. It does not punish the dark. It stands in one place and burns, so that whoever is lost out there can find the way home, and it cannot do even that. It turns out, unless someone you have let in is willing to climb the stairs beside you on the nights your knees give out. Every morning, I still make 2 cups of coffee. One I drink, one I set on the sill and let go cold. In the light of the kitchen window, Eleanor placed exactly where the first sun comes off the water. The roses are blooming. The boy is home. The work is good, and the light is on. It will stay on for as long as these old hands can climb to reach it, and after that, for as long as the boys I taught remember why it matters. That was the whole promise. I mean to keep it to the end,